Thousands filled the Las Vegas Hilton expecting another flawless Elvis show. But in the middle of a song, Elvis suddenly stopped the band, stared into the wings, and called out his own manager, Colonel Tom Parker, right there on stage. The cameras kept rolling, and the tension that followed changed everything. August 26, 1974, Las Vegas Hilton International Showroom. More than 4,200 people squeezed into the glowing red seats, their voices rising like warm air under the chandeliers. The stage lights shimmered across the gold curtains. Ushers hurried down aisles, whispering last reminders before the midnight show began. The whole room buzzed with the promise of another perfect Elvis performance. Backstage, Colonel Tom Parker watched from the shadows, arms folded tightly across his chest. He liked control. He liked predictability. And tonight's show had been planned down to the second. Every joke, every cue, every costume change. But something in the air made him uneasy. Elvis had been restless for days, pacing halls, avoiding rehearsals, questioning decisions that Parker insisted were good business. The orchestra tuned their horns. The drums tapped lightly. Fans clapped rhythmically as the lights dimmed. A wave of excitement moved through the crowd like a single heartbeat speeding up. Elvis walked onto the stage in a blue and silver jumpsuit, rhinestones flashing like sparks. Cheers burst through the room. But up close, the cameras captured something the crowd in the balcony couldn't see. A tightness in his jaw, a tiredness behind his smile. He looked like a man carrying too much weight. As the first notes rang out, Elvis gripped the microphone. The spotlight hit his face. He smiled, but the edges of it felt stiff, forced. He scanned the crowd for a moment, taking in rows of faces that adored him. But even their cheers couldn't reach whatever was stirring inside him tonight. The music swelled behind him, a familiar opening, perfectly rehearsed. Yet something felt wrong. Something felt off. Elvis shifted his stance. His shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. The camera near the orchestra pit zoomed in, as if sensing a crack forming beneath the glitter. Have you ever stepped into a room knowing you would have to pretend, even when your heart refused to follow along? And what happens when you realize you're done pretending? Charlie Hodge stepped up beside him, handing him a water cup and adjusting the scarf around his neck. You okay, E? He whispered. Elvis nodded once, but his eyes stayed distant. The crowd stayed loud, waiting for the show to explode into its usual energy. But a strange tension curled through the room, subtle at first, like the hush before a storm. A few fans noticed Elvis's hand shaking slightly as he lifted the mic. He cleared his throat. The band hit the next cue. The crowd cheered again, louder this time, trying to give him energy. Elvis stepped forward. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The band burst into the opening number, brass flashing like sunlight on metal. Elvis moved with practiced smoothness, his blue and silver jumpsuit sparkling under the stage lights. From the balcony, he looked unstoppable, every gesture sharp, every note strong. The crowd roared, clapping in perfect rhythm, raising the room's energy higher and higher. But close-up cameras revealed the truth the crowd couldn't see. His jaw clenched between lines. A tiny tremble ran through his right hand. His breaths came quicker than usual. Small cracks, hidden behind glitter. Charlie Hodge noticed it first. He stepped up between verses, handing Elvis a water cup. You sure you're all right? He whispered. Elvis nodded, but the nod felt empty. His eyes stayed unfocused, drifting toward stage right, toward the shadows where Colonel Parker stood watching. Parker didn't clap. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just stared, holding his clipboard like a judge waiting for a mistake. Elvis turned back to the audience, trying to push through. He hit the high notes. He danced. He tossed scarves to fans who practically reached out in tears. But even with all that love pouring toward him, something inside him stayed tight. Weeks of arguments sat behind his smile. Parker wanted a tougher schedule. More shows, more cities, more money. Elvis wanted rest, new music, freedom. They clashed. And tonight, the pressure pressed against him like a hand on his throat. The crowd noticed small changes. Elvis paused longer between jokes. His laugh felt thinner. During one song, he looked down as if trying to catch his breath. A woman in the front row whispered, "He seems tired." Her friend replied, "No, he seems upset." Elvis pushed ahead anyway. He always pushed ahead. But the cracks spread. One short shock line slipped through the night. He wasn't himself. At around the 90-second mark, the first mid-hook revealed itself. Something in Elvis's face said he wasn't going to finish the night the way Parker wanted. The orchestra continued its flawless routine. But Elvis hesitated before the next verse. For a split second, his lips pressed into a thin line. Frustration, pain, something deeper. Have you ever felt trapped inside a role everyone expects you to play? And what happens when you realize you can't keep playing it anymore? The camera near the orchestra pit zoomed in again, catching Elvis glancing to the wings. His eyes narrowed for half a second, as if warning someone, as if promising himself something. Charlie Hodge watched quietly. He knew Elvis well, knew when he was masking pain. He whispered again, "We can slow down if you want." Elvis didn't reply this time. He just kept singing. But his voice cracked on a line he had sung 1,000 times perfectly. A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Fans shifted, wondering if they imagined it. Parker stiffened. Elvis wiped sweat from his forehead, though the room wasn't that hot. His hands gripped the mic harder. A sternness crossed his face. Small, quick, but real. Halfway through the set, the orchestra launched the next song. The crowd cheered in relief, thinking the moment had passed. But Elvis didn't step into the next line. He didn't follow the cue. He just stood there, silent. The band kept playing for a beat, then hesitated, then faltered. Charlie looked at him. The crowd leaned in. Elvis inhaled deeply. He was about to make a choice no one saw coming. The song began softly, one of the ballads Elvis could normally sing in his sleep. The kind of song that made the Las Vegas Hilton feel smaller, warmer, almost gentle. The orchestra eased into the melody. Fans leaned back, ready to melt into the moment. But Elvis didn't. He hesitated on the very first line. His voice landed late, slightly off the beat. A few music players glanced at each other. Charlie Hodge's eyebrows lifted in concern. Elvis wasn't usually late. Not ever. Then, in the middle of the second verse, he stopped. Just stopped. The orchestra stumbled into silence. Violins hovered mid-note. A trumpet squeaked in confusion. Someone in the balcony whispered, "Is this part of the show?" Another voice answered, "I don't think so." Elvis held the microphone at his waist, breathing hard. The crowd leaned forward as if pulled by a rope. Up close, the camera caught a storm in his eyes. A mixture of exhaustion, anger, and something deeper. Something that had been held in too long. He turned his head sharply toward the wings on stage right. Toward Colonel Parker. Parker stood in the shadows, clipboard in hand, wearing the same stiff grin he'd worn for years. But now his smile cracked. His eyes narrowed. His fingers tightened around his cigar. Elvis stared at him across the stage lights. The room froze. The air thickened. Even the waitstaff paused mid-step. For a brief moment, the audience thought Elvis might joke. Maybe laugh it off. Maybe blame the sound guy. But then Elvis stepped forward and lifted the mic. "You want to run my show tonight, Colonel?" Gasps burst across the entire showroom. He wasn't joking. Not even a little. Elvis's voice cut the air like glass. "Go on," he said slowly. "Come finish this song yourself." A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A man whispered, "Is he talking to Parker?" "He can't, he wouldn't." But he would, and he did. Parker shifted one foot back, startled. His cigar shook. Sweat glistened across his forehead under the hot lights. The cameras zoomed instinctively toward the moment, catching every twitch in his face. Charlie Hodge whispered from behind Elvis, What are you doing?" But Elvis didn't answer. His focus stayed locked on Parker like he'd finally found the courage to speak a truth that had been choking him for years. Have you ever held in something for so long that it burned inside you? And when you finally spoke it, did it come out louder than you expected? Elvis inhaled slowly, chest rising under the rhinestones. A single spotlight brightened over him, leaving Parker in deeper shadow. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't move. They barely breathed, because everyone in that room felt it. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a stunt. This was real. A ripple of unease spread through the orchestra. Someone accidentally tapped their music stand, the quiet clink echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Parker didn't step forward. He stayed frozen, speechless. Elvis looked at him for another long second, then lowered the mic. A choice landed inside his chest. A hard one, a necessary one, and he made it. Elvis turned away from Parker. He turned away from the script. He turned away from the invisible chains that had held him for so long. Slowly, he stepped toward the edge of the stage. Some fans gasped. Some whispered prayers. Others just stared, afraid to blink. Because Elvis Presley, the man who never broke character, never broke routine, was breaking everything tonight. Parker didn't move, but Elvis did. For a long moment, Elvis didn't move. The silence in the Las Vegas Hilton felt heavy enough to bend the air. Then, slowly, he stepped away from the microphone. One foot forward, then another, like a man walking toward something he'd avoided for years. The crowd tightened as if the entire room inhaled at once. Elvis wasn't rushing. He wasn't angry. He was sure. He moved toward the right edge of the stage where Colonel Parker stood half hidden behind the curtain, still clutching that clipboard. The orchestra stayed frozen, instruments hanging in midair. Spotlights followed Elvis in a shaky arc, unsure if they were supposed to. A security guard near the corner panicked. He looked at his supervisor for instructions, but none came. Nobody knew what to do when a legend stepped out of the script. Whispers spread like sparks across the showroom. Is he really going over there? What is he doing? Oh my God! This is happening. Parker backed up a step. Just one. But cameras caught it. One camera near the pit zoomed in, capturing the nervous twitch in his jaw. Another camera followed Elvis's steady march. The tension was so thick it felt like the whole stage tilted toward confrontation. Elvis's boots thudded softly on the wooden floor. He pointed toward Parker, slow and controlled, like he wanted every fan in that room and every camera to see it clearly. "You're not going to bury me in another contract," Elvis said, voice low but sharp enough to cut through the dark. "Not tonight." Some fans gasped. Others applauded in shock. A wave of uncertain cheers rippled through the crowd. The room didn't know whether to celebrate or fear what was unfolding. Charlie Hodge rushed forward, grabbing at Elvis's elbow gently. Come on. Let's get back to the mic." But Elvis shook him off. Not violently, not rudely, just firmly. A man reclaiming something that slipped from his hands a long time ago. Charlie froze. He'd never seen this version of Elvis. No stage mask. No practiced charm. Just truth. What does it feel like to watch someone finally speak the words they've swallowed for years? And what do you do when those words change the air around you? Elvis took another step toward the wings. Parker didn't speak. He didn't blink. The clipboard in his hand trembled slightly, the papers rustling like frightened birds. The audience shifted, leaning toward the tension like it was gravity. A woman in the third row whispered to her friend, "He's finally standing up to him." Her friend whispered back, "Why now?" But deep down, many knew why. You can only push someone so far. A hush fell again. Another pattern breaker. Elvis wasn't performing. He was fighting for himself. At around the 3-minute story mark, the second mid-hook dropped naturally. People came to hear hits, but instead witnessed a man break free in real time. The room felt electric, almost dangerous. Something historic was happening, and everyone knew it before anyone said a word. Elvis stopped just feet from Parker. Their eyes locked through shadows and stage light. No shouting, no chaos, just a silent collision of two long histories. Then Elvis turned away from him. He walked back toward center stage, moving with a calm that felt heavier than any outburst. The spotlight swung with him, leaving Parker swallowed in darkness. Elvis reached the microphone again. He lifted it slowly. The room braced itself. For the first time all night, Elvis didn't look like the star who followed every cue. He looked like a man about to tell the truth. He inhaled, paused, and faced the entire crowd. Elvis stood at the microphone again, but the man facing the crowd wasn't the same one who started the show. His chest rose slowly with each breath. His eyes burned with something the lights couldn't soften. The entire Hilton showroom leaned toward him, waiting for the next sound. He didn't launch into a song. He didn't crack a joke. He spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, steady and clear, "I'm not a machine." A ripple passed through the crowd. Some people frowned. Some nodded. But everyone listened. Elvis rarely spoke like this, without charm, without the smooth stage voice, without the safety of humor. "I'm not something you schedule to death," he continued. His voice echoed off the ceiling like it belonged in a courtroom, not a casino showroom. Parker shifted in the shadows. His jaw tightened. The clipboard in his hand bent slightly under the pressure of his grip. A camera near the orchestra pit caught every tiny twitch on his face. The orchestra didn't move. The waitstaff froze. Even the air felt still. Elvis looked around the room, eyes scanning row after row of people who came to see a legend, but instead were witnessing a man trying to reclaim himself. "I give you everything I have up here," he said, tapping the stage lightly. "But I'm not giving away my soul." Those last 6 words dropped into the silence like a stone into deep water. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. The man beside her whispered, "He's talking about Parker." Another fan muttered, "He's finally saying it." What happens when the truth is louder than the performance? And have you ever felt your voice rise only after someone tried to take it from you? Elvis lowered the microphone for a moment, letting the meaning sink in. The crowd didn't clap yet. They didn't know if they were supposed to. They just stared. It felt like every heart in the room was tied to a single string, and Elvis held the other end. Charlie Hodge stepped closer, whispering, Take a breath." Elvis didn't answer. He didn't need to. His voice carried all the strength he had held in for months. The spotlight tightened around him. The glow around his jumpsuit flickered in soft blue and silver tones. Sweat rolled slowly down the side of his face, but he didn't wipe it away. Then, another short, sharp line, "No more lies." The audience gasped. Parker's eyes widened. The moment froze. It was rare, almost unheard of, to see Elvis push back in public. He'd always been the polite Southern boy, the crowd pleaser, the one who followed the script because millions depended on him. But tonight, he wasn't the puppet. He wasn't the product. He wasn't the act. He was the man. Fans sensed Parker's reaction. He'd stepped closer to the curtain, shoulders tense, lips pressed into a hard line. One spotlight accidentally brushed over him for a second, catching the shocked pinch in his expression before sliding away. Some fans noticed. Some didn't. But the cameras did. And the cameras didn't blink. The orchestra watched with wide eyes. One violinist held her bow frozen above the strings. A trumpeter whispered to the drummer, "Is this real?" The drummer quietly replied, "Oh, it's real." Elvis lifted the mic again, ready to continue. But the cameras captured something else first. Parker's face tightening like he had just realized the whole world was watching. One of the cameras near the orchestra pit caught it, the exact angle no one planned, no one approved, and no one thought would matter until years later. A tight shot, framed accidentally, zoomed in on Colonel Parker's face. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. His cigar trembled between his fingers. It was the first time the audience saw Parker not as the confident manager who controlled everything, but as a man caught completely off guard. Technicians in the back exchanged anxious glances. Should they cut the feed? Should they lower the lights? Should they pretend this wasn't happening? No one dared to touch a button. The room felt like a glass window, one wrong move and it might shatter. The mic crackled softly as Elvis lifted it again. His voice carried raw, unpolished strength. "You can't control me anymore." The words were simple, but the room reacted like it had been struck by lightning. Gasps rose. A few fans even stood up, unsure if they should cheer or panic. The Hilton showroom had never felt so small, so charged, so alive. The pattern breaker slipped through the moment. This wasn't show business anymore. This was truth. Parker stepped forward an inch, shoulders squared, but Elvis didn't flinch. He looked like a man who'd finally found a door he had been trying to escape through for years. Charlie Hodge whispered behind him, This is gonna blow up." Elvis didn't turn. His focus stayed on the crowd, not the man in the shadows. The orchestra remained frozen. One violinist lowered her bow, unsure if she should keep playing or pretend to tune her instrument. A sax player's breath caught in his throat. Even the waiters standing by the doors paused mid-step. A strange quiet washed through the room, the kind that makes every heartbeat feel loud. What part of you comes out when you're finally pushed too far? And what happens when the world sees it on camera? Elvis took a breath. Not a shaky one, a steady, decision-making breath. Then he stepped away from the microphone and faced the crowd fully. "This is my show," he said. "Not his." The audience erupted into a chaotic mix of cheers, gasps, and stunned silence. Some people clapped wildly. Others covered their mouths. A few fans looked around as if checking whether this could possibly be real. Meanwhile, the camera stayed locked on Parker. His face tightened. His hand squeezed the clipboard so hard the metal clip bent. The spotlight shifted slightly, and that glare hit him full on for one painful second. Anyone watching closely could see it. Fear, shock, and something else, something like losing control. Bootleggers in the audience, the ones with hidden cassette recorders inside purses and jacket sleeves, captured every second. Years later, those tapes would resurface, echoing Elvis's voice raw and unfiltered, the crowd's reaction, and Parker's breath caught on my kiss. Elvis walked back towards center stage slowly, boots tapping lightly against the floor. He didn't look back at Parker. He didn't need to. The story had already been written. The crowd started clapping again, louder this time, like they were cheering for more than a singer. They were cheering for a man reclaiming something he'd lost. But the night didn't end in anger. It ended in something else. Backstage, the noise of the crowd faded into a dull, distant hum. Elvis slipped through the curtain as if the whole room had drained the strength from his body. His boots dragged against the hallway floor. Sweat clung to his face, but it wasn't from the show. It was from everything he'd carried for years. He didn't slam doors. He didn't yell. He just sat. A simple folding chair waited beside a rack of rhinestone jumpsuits. Elvis lowered himself onto it slowly, elbows resting on his knees, hands hanging loosely. His breath came out shaky, like someone finally letting go after holding it in too long. A prop scarf lay across his lap. It slipped off and landed softly beside a forgotten ticket stub on the ground. The two objects touched, small, quiet symbols in a moment that felt strangely huge. Parker marched in a few seconds later, expecting anger, expecting excuses, expecting a fight he could win. But the scene stopped him cold. Elvis didn't even look up. The silence between them stretched like a tight rope. "What was that out there?" Parker snapped. Elvis didn't answer immediately. He stared at the floor, the jumpy shadows from overhead lights flickering across his boots. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, not weak, but tired in a way words rarely capture. "I need out." 3 simple words, but they shook the room harder than anything he'd said on stage. Parker froze. His face tightened. His mouth dropped open for a half-second before he caught himself. He wasn't used to losing control. He wasn't used to Elvis drawing lines. He certainly wasn't used to hearing the word out. Charlie Hodge stepped into the hallway quietly, sensing the shift. He didn't interrupt. He just watched, realizing they were witnessing something no one else would ever truly understand. Have you ever seen someone finally decide to save themselves, even if it means breaking everything around them? And what does freedom feel like in the exact second you choose it? Parker tried to regain his composure. "Elvis, think about this." "I already have," Elvis said, still not looking up. His voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It just landed with finality. The silence returned, heavier than before. A silence that marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. Years later, people would forget the exact words, but they would remember the place. Because a plaque would mark this hallway. A plaque that told the world this was where everything changed. Long after the lights of the Las Vegas Hilton dimmed, and long after the smoky scent of the showroom disappeared from the carpets, people still talked about that night. August 26, 1974. A night when Elvis didn't just sing. He stood up. He changed the script written for him and wrote his own instead. The confrontation became a quiet legend. Not a headline. Not a scandal. A shift. Bootleg tapes leaked first. Hissing audio where fans could hear Elvis's raw voice and the stunned silence of thousands. Then grainy stills appeared in fan clubs, showing Colonel Parker's frozen expression caught under a stray spotlight. Each photo looked like a frame from a movie someone tried to hide. In the years that followed, interviews came and went, but neither man ever spoke about that night in detail. Parker insisted everything was handled professionally. Elvis brushed it aside, saying only, "Sometimes you gotta speak," but fans knew different. They felt the truth in their bones. A small plaque now hangs in a hallway of the Hilton, tucked beside old show posters and faded ticket stubs. It reads, August 26, 1974, the night Elvis spoke his truth. Visitors stop and stare. Some touch the edge of the metal as if it holds electricity. Some whisper stories they heard from grandparents who were in the crowd that night. A few even bring their own cassette recordings, old, rattling tapes passed down like family treasures. Because the moment wasn't about anger. It was about release. It was about choosing soul over silence. What truth are you still afraid to say out loud? And who might you become if you finally let it spill? People came that night to hear a legend. Instead, they watched a man claim himself again. And that part, the quiet courage, that's what still lives. Behind the rhinestones, behind the spotlight, behind the myth. If the story moved you, share it with someone who's ever struggled to speak their truth. And tell us below, have you ever reached a moment where staying silent cost more than speaking up? Your voice might inspire someone else to finally break their own script.